Welcome to the Family Milk Cow podcast, where in every episode I cover topics that equip you with the skills and know-how to look after your girls in the barn. Family milk cows are more than just livestock. They are a part of our families. They deserve the best care possible from knowledgeable and responsible owners. So pull up a chair or your milk stool and let's dive into another episode of the Family Milk Cow podcast. On this episode of the Family Milk Cow podcast, we discuss topics of animal care, nutrition, and veterinary practice. This podcast and all content is informational only. Please always consult with your veterinarian when it comes to the care of your cow. Hello and welcome back for yet another episode here of the podcast. I'm your host as always, Kelsey Wolf. You may also know me from the blog or YouTube channel Rough and Tumble Farmhouse. Before we dive into this episode, I just wanted to say if you haven't checked me out over on YouTube or on the blog, please do. I cover so many other topics, not just milk cows. I've got lots of cheese making things. I do have lots of milk cow things I've talked about in the past over on the blog and the channel. And beyond that, I just cover tons of topics related to small farming, homesteading, trying to do things for the most part as naturally as possible. So I would love to have you swing by and visit me there as well. If you like my style here on the podcast, you might like my style over on YouTube as well. All right, now that's enough pitching myself. Let's talk about lice and dairy cattle. This is one of those topics where I see it all the time this time of year. People are posting pictures of their cows. Does my cow have lice? What's going on here? Now, honestly, I'm releasing this episode in May. And most of the time, it isn't lice, it's just shedding. Our cows a lot of times look really terrible when they're shedding out. They look real patchy and kind of rough. And so a lot of the times it isn't lice, even though half the people are going to respond, yep, that's lice. So with that in mind, I thought it was really important that we talk about what lice is, what the issues are it can cause, how to tell if your animals have it, how to prevent it, how to treat it. We're going to cover hopefully everything really to get you started on the lice topic here in this podcast. You may have noticed at the beginning of this episode, for the first time, I put sort of a disclosure. Now, honestly, this is mostly because I don't want someone to come and sue me because of the information I'm sharing on the podcast. So please always use this podcast as the start of your research and not the end all be all for any sort of veterinary topics. One thing that's really important to me on this podcast, and I also do this on the blog and on the YouTube channel, is I like to be really well researched when it comes to a topic. It's important to me that you know I am taking my time to make sure I'm giving you solid information you can trust. So for today's episode, the resources that I have gone to are the books Natural Cattle Care, the classic, which you probably already have, Keeping the Family Cow, Treating Dairy Cows Naturally, and probably the best resource on this is I don't know if it's Merck Veterinary Manual. This thing is huge. She's hefty. The pages are thinner than Bible pages, but it has thousands of pages of really, really good information. It's kind of pricey, but gosh, I recommend if you keep livestock of any kind, it is definitely worth the investment. You can actually get older copies of it, sometimes for cheaper, but of course they don't have the most up-to-date information. But if you are looking for a gift, Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthday, that veterinary manual is a good one. I also spent some time around on a few different extension websites, including, let's see, I think it was Wisconsin, Montana, and University of Minnesota as well. Now let's dive into lice and what it is exactly. Lice is a small little critter and it comes in a couple of different kinds. It can also be called pediculosis, I believe is how it's pronounced. At least that's what it calls it in the veterinary manual. You're typically going to see one of two types of lice. There are blood-sucking lice and there are chewing/biting lice. So the blood-sucking lice are obviously sucking the blood out of your animal, and the chewing/biting lice are more so eating bits of hair, skin fragments, particles, all that kind of stuff. When it comes to lice, they tend to be species specific or at least very species similar. This is something that for years as a kid, don't pick up bird feathers, you're going to get lice from bird feathers. Well, actually no, because the lice on bird feathers, if there is lice on there, is not the same sort of lice that people can get. Lice themselves are very flat. They are wingless and they are 2 to 4 millimeters in size, so they are pretty small. They have little legs, and the claws on their legs, very interestingly, are developed to be just the correct width of the hair or feather shaft of whatever individual host that they have adapted to, which I think is fascinating. Now, lice also, you can call them kind of louse, the eggs are called nits, and they are usually kind of pale and translucent. Lice take 3 to 4 weeks to complete an entire generation. And one thing that's a bugger about these little things is they can unfortunately transmit to bacteria and fungi as well as just stressing out your animal in general. If you live in a more temperate climate, there are probably about 5 species that live in your area. So when it comes to our dairy cattle, we're usually looking at there's 1 species of chewing lice and then 4 species of blood-sucking lice that might be infecting your animal. If you live somewhere where it's a lot warmer, then you might have some additional species of either type of lice that you could be dealing with. It's really interesting in terms of treating based on what species of lice you have. For the most part, when we get into kind of the treatment options here, it's going to matter more if they are a chewing or a blood-sucking kind, but it's interesting the species of lice themselves have preferences and different ways they behave. So some of the species prefer younger animals and some of them prefer older animals. They also feed kind of in different ways. So the chewing lice, I think it is, tend to like to kind of congregate in groups, whereas the blood-sucking lice will just go and be off more by themselves. So that's kind of a way you can tell, one of the ways you can tell what kind you have. But for the most part, it's not going to matter, like I said, too much what type of lice you are dealing with in terms of treatment. Now, what are some of the things that can cause your animal to get lice? So, it can be transmitted via contact. It's not going to be such a big deal if you just have 1 or 2 cows. The odds of them transmitting from one to the other aren't necessarily quite as high. But some of the reasons or some of the stressors that can cause lice is a high stocking density. So, you've got lots of animals that are really close together, animals that have poor feed quality and poor nutrition, animals depending on where they are at in gestation, and also having underlying health issues. Lice are opportunists and they are going to take an animal that already is a little bit vulnerable and they're going to try and take advantage of that. Obviously, for the most part, they already have some sort of stressor that's causing them to have lice, unless, of course, they just caught it from another already stressed animal. But so you're likely going to see some weight loss in your animal as they're having literally their blood sucked and tissue consumed. You can see a decrease in production again because of the stress from them. And the kind of telltale sign is the hide and hair damage. Now, I see again often this time of year, like I said, where you see animals looking kind of rough because it's spring, or on occasion, maybe animals are eating and something about their feed bunk is causing rubbing in one spot. That's not something that's, untypical in terms of our cows. But when it comes to the lice itself, you should actually be able to see them. You should be able to find them. And so it's not just, oh, they've kind of got some patchy looking hair. You should be able to dig on in there and actually find the lice themselves. Now, to find these little buggers, some of them are going to move. I can't remember between the biting lice and the blood-sucking lice and the chewing lice. One of them, I can't remember which one tends to scurry away more from light, if you part the hair, whereas the other ones don't really care and they just kind of stay there. I feel like maybe the chewing lice would be the ones to scatter versus the bloodsuckers are kind of, stuck on their sucking. So that's my assumption. But they will tend to congregate around the tail, sort of like right where her switch is going to start. There is kind of nice and fluffy, fuzzy usually. The head, the ears, along their spine, and any sort of skin folds, like their dewlap, kind of under sort of like armpit type areas. Those are places where you want to look to try and find the lice. And you should be able to see them or see their eggs. And the eggs themselves are going to be stuck down to the base of the hair, really close to the skin. If you have an animal that's kind of poorly and you don't see any signs of lice, even if they've got patchy hair, whatever, and you dig around and look in all these places and see no eggs, you see no lice, then lice probably isn't actually your issue. All right, now let's talk about treatment, and I'm going to go ahead and probably get myself sued here, but let's talk about different treatment methods. So there's a couple of different methods that I have read based on the different sources I shared with you before. So from the book Natural Cattle Care, she talks about how, for the most part, lice is being caused by a lack of sulfur, which I thought was interesting. I didn't really see that reflected in any of the other research I did, but she recommends treating with a heaped tablespoon of sulfur every day, and that if doing so, the lice would leave the animal within a week, she says. Or she also says you can rub 2 to 3 handfuls of sulfur along the spine and do that for a few days in a row, and that would also help cause them to leave. Sulfur is something that's important that our cattle have nutritionally. This is one I would say maybe consult with your vet to see if maybe there's other symptoms you're seeing of your animal not getting enough sulfur. They do have sulfur salt licks you can get to provide for your animals. So that's something to maybe look into if you're seeing lice as a recurring thing. Possibly it could be a sulfur deficiency. In the book Keeping the Family Cow, she recommends treating with diatomaceous earth. And this is probably the method I honestly would try if we had a lice issue in our cattle. We had a lice issue with chickens several years ago, and DE was the method I decided to go with. And we treated every single bird in the coop. And my husband and I, we masked up and we put on gloves because it is definitely an irritant. I don't think you need to do that if you're just treating a cow once. Maybe you would. I wouldn't be worried about your cow. We did it because we were treating, 30 chickens. The chickens got one quick kind of dust bath in it and we're done versus us, going through it. We spent probably a good hour treating them this way. Personally, I would give DE a shot. And with that, you're going to just take it, a few handfuls, kind of like she was saying with the sulfur, and rub it in along their spine, all the way from tip to tail. You can kind of work it in behind their ears, those folds like we talked about, anywhere where you were seeing the lice. And DE, why it works in that is the particles are microscopically razor sharp and it basically slices them up. If you are treating this way and with any other treatments, you want to follow it up again in 7 to 10 days because while this is effective against the living adult lice, any eggs they have laid, which they lay 1 egg a day, those eggs, when they hatch, you're going to need to treat again to then kill off that next batch. So it might take, 2 or 3 rounds of this to have it work. There are also some pour-on methods, which might just be the easiest thing if you're fine with that you can just pick up from, Fleet Farm or whatever sort of fleet supply. Fleet Farms are fleet supply store, so I always think of just Fleet Farm. But whatever sort of fleet supply stores in your area, you can probably just get some sort of a pour-on treatment, and you're just going to want to follow the instructions. Make sure it is safe if you're treating a lactating animal. Make sure it's safe for them to have during their lactation. If they are pregnant, check that it's fine to use during gestation. Make sure you read all the fine print and make sure you follow the instructions on the bottle. And a lot of them do too have you retreat again at a certain point. Another tip too that might help with this is if you are treating an animal that is particularly shaggy, particularly hairy, it might be worth giving them a clip or a trim, especially in those areas where you're seeing lots of lice, because then if you're doing sort of a more holistic treatment like rubbing in the DE, you're going to have a much better shot at it actually working. Interestingly enough, even though we see lots of questions about lice in the spring, they typically are transmitted more in the winter, according to the data. But in warm weather, the eggs can actually drop off the animals and infect bedding and stuff like that, or other surfaces in the area where your animals are. So if you do have an infected animal, it's a good idea if you can kind of quarantine them until they are treated. And then also make sure any of the spaces they've been inhabiting, just try and make sure if you can keep them free from other animals for at least a week, then those lice should die off. You can also kind of sanitize things if you want to, but I think just time is probably the easiest route. I can't imagine trying to sanitize a stall or something like that would be pretty tricky. So just giving it that time in between having another animal in that space. Now, again, as I said, this podcast should serve as kind of the jumping off point for you in terms of doing some of your own research, but hopefully that gave you a good primer on what lice are, how to deal with them, and hopefully how to prevent them in the future. Thanks as always for tuning in, you guys. Next week, we are going to be talking about the cost of getting and maintaining a dairy cow. I honestly am not even sure I want to think about it. I'm certainly not going to tell my husband about it. I hope he doesn't listen to the next episode when he finds out how much we spend on keeping our cow. Oh, goodness. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Family Milk Cow Podcast. You can become a part of the Family Milk Cow Podcast by joining the Milkmaid Brigade, sponsoring an episode, or following along on social media. You can find links for all these and more, including show notes, at familymilkcowpodcast.com. If you love what you're hearing, please rate, review, subscribe, and turn on those automatic downloads. One of the best ways to support this show is simply by sharing it. And as always, make sure to give your girl down in the barn a good scratch behind the ears from me.